Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. Today we have an amazing guest, Mr. Jose Tomas. How are you, Jose?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
It's great to see you. And you can see that I've, in honor of your good self, you see I've flown over in the G&T Sessions helicopter to South Beach to be close to you today. So I believe you're joining us from somewhere nice.
Definitely here in Miami. Thank you so much for having such a great backdrop.
It's quite a cool backdrop, isn't it?
I feel like a tourist in my own hometown.
Well, no, it's great to see you. I know you're incredibly busy, so it's good to get some time with you on this episode of the G&T Sessions podcast. So, given you are based in Miami, obviously getting out of bed in the morning is a bit of a chore. But what does get you out of the bed in the morning these days?
It's unpredictable weather down here. We just had a tropical depression pass by, so it's not necessarily all as beautiful as that backdrop. But I would say that now being in this particular stage of my career, what gets me in the morning is the ability to influence folks that were in my seat. In some instances that are currently in the CHRO position or senior leadership positions, that get an opportunity to chat with someone who spent decades doing what they were doing. And it feels good to have the ability to mentor, in some instances, provide a service to these great leaders and in ensuring that they're actually delivering great human capital strategy.
So it sounds like you said CHRO. So for people who are listening on this episode, then what does that mean? What does a CHRO mean?
It's the Chief Human Resources Officer in most organizations, the head of the human capital function, or the Chief People Officer. We have so many titles, right? We're always changing the title. But it's the person that's accountable for the people strategy in an organization. In some companies, it is an extremely valuable position. And in some organizations, truthfully, it's been relegated to administrative functions, and it just depends on the life cycle of an organization and the value it has on people as a true asset.
And is that something that you? So I suppose people obviously is very important part of the business, and it's like working with the CEO. So it's kind of like it's a kind of a true business partner to the CEO. I suppose working on that kind of people strategy.
Absolutely. In some instances, it reports to other C-suite executives, and in some instances, it reports into the chief executive officer or the CEO. That's not always representative of what the value of the function is. But what we do find is that the function may play an incredibly important role in the organization, regardless of where it's reporting, regardless of the title, regardless of its stated objectives. It really is a function that focuses heavily on the entire life cycle of the employee.
So you said that you now what gets out of bed is actually influencing the people that are doing those roles. So it sounds like that means that you don't do that role anymore, but you maybe did do it before. But maybe to be revealed.
I did. I spent over 25 years in the human resources arena. 10 years prior to that in the operations side, but I've worked in multiple industries, grocery stores, from started there, then moved on to logistics and transportation, then fast food, then healthcare, then auto manufacturing. So I've been the chief human resources officers at some large companies, including Burger King, which you know as the home of the Whopper. Anthem Health, which is a very large Fortune 30, as a matter of fact, health benefits provider here in the United States, and then General Motors, which you may be familiar with their vehicles throughout the world. And I've been the global head of HR for all those functions.
And what? So it sounds like but you don't do that anymore. It sounds like you feel like you've done your time there, or you learned a lot, but you've still got more to learn.
Absolutely. So I did essentially retire from the corporate world after after those 25 years in HR. And today I have the pleasure of running an organization called BrandSparc, and we focus heavily on internal communications, employment branding, and really developing a message based on the company's culture. So we get to go in and talk to CEOs and talk to chief marketing officers and heads of HR and help them shape the way that they communicate their vision, their values, their mission. In some instances, they just allow us to take over the entire internal communications function and allow us the opportunity to communicate, whether it's internally in their intranet system, in methods that in some instances are podcast, video, text messaging, print, whatever it is, to their own employees, or conversely to the market and how they're communicating either through recruitment marketing strategies or campaigns, or just keeping their social media engagement alive through LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, and other platforms. So we get the pleasure of understanding an organization, understanding what makes them tick. We understand their values, their overall culture. In some instances, we get to go and tell folks, that's a beautiful vision that you have for your culture, but it's not really the truth. It may be aspiration.
Surely there can't be a gap. Surely not.
In some instances, it's aspirational, right? You may say we're a truly innovative company, and then when you talk to the employees, you find out that maybe they're not as innovative as they think they are, but It may be aspirational, which allows you the opportunity to go and attract individuals that have the skill set, the experience to be innovative. And then if you allow them to actually exploit those skills, then you can build an innovative organization. So we get to take a blend of what's real, who are you really, what are your true values, and then blend that with the aspirational component, and then create an overall message, a creative message that is used from, basically for the entire life cycle of an employee on your employment or careers websites, internally, externally, your job profiles, the way you handle your remuneration or your commission programs, your compensation benefit programs, even how you communicate that, all the way through the retirement or the end of the life cycle of an employee. So we get to put a voice to sometimes the human resources function too.
And I mean, that's really interesting, because I think, obviously given, we're in 2020 and people are obviously starting to rethink everything they're doing in relation to probably their work life and general existence. I suppose are you seeing, I presume you're seeing this as quite an important area, because I think you obviously, when you're actually in a company yourself, you obviously work out the kind of best practices. But then when you come out, you start to observe other companies and you see this kind of, they need some help in some of these areas because they're not in the best place they could be. You saw a gap in the market there, so you're presuming, with this kind of area.
We not only saw a gap in the market, but we also were responsible for this type of work in our own organizations. So we saw the impact that it could have. And in 2020, certainly being an anomaly in terms of many of our careers, what we discovered very quickly is shifting from the office environment to sometimes a work at home environment, how easily that could impact your culture. You're no longer surrounded by people. You're now maybe staring at a picture frame. Maybe you have an empty wall. That becomes your office setting, and you no longer have that camaraderie. You don't have the water cooler talk. You missed out quite a bit. So we had to help many of our clients figure out, well, how do I communicate now? I used to have these meetings. Everybody used to come in and hear me speak for a month. Hear me speak at the end of the month about the results, or on a quarterly basis.
Like a town hall or something like that, you mean?
Town halls have shifted to these Zoom calls.
Zoom halls. Yeah.
Absolutely. But you have to also help them remain engaged. Your employees remain engaged because they're no longer surrounded by the the other folks that would, in essence, I like to use this term, jazz you up, give you that energy around the brand.
Yeah.
And I think we've been able to help organizations keep their vision values alive, keep their culture alive by helping CEOs and other C-suite executives communicate differently and communicate far more often than they used to, because they need to be heard more often. Early on, it was very concerning to many leaders, because they didn't know what folks were doing at home. Are they truly productive? And we were helping them figure out how to not only engage, but even how to measure that performance through some of our platforms.
So try and not be as micromanagement, or not micromanage, but trust and actually work out appropriate communication and keep connected.
And in some instances, change the way your culture works. Because if you were an organization where FaceTime was important, you had to see the individual. Now all of a sudden, you're not seeing your employees. You have to figure out different methods to communicate with them. The other thing we saw this year is obviously a rise in diversity and inclusion efforts, and many organizations stated their objectives very early as a result of Black Lives Matter and some other unfortunate situations that were going on specifically here in the U.S. But we have found that many organizations went out and provided a statement, but they wasn't really who they were internally. So we've been able to help them blend, again, who they really are, what the reality is with what's going on in the market. And we've been able to help some of these organizations deliver the appropriate messages around their diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, which certainly was not something that was as active prior years. I think it is very active for good reason, and I think it's going to stay embedded into many of the platforms that organizations are developing around their people culture efforts.
So I mean, I know you touched on some of the obviously very well known organisations you've supported and helped lead. I mean, is there a reason why you got into the people side of it in the first place? Is there was there something that happened in your backstory that said I want to own, or I want to become a true people leader at scale? Is there something that happened, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Well, I didn't fall into it. I actually studied what was at the time personnel management in my undergrad. I did my master's in human resource management, but my undergrad was in personnel, and which I guess shows how old I am. But the reality is that I wanted to go in and I wanted to get into the HR function, and there weren't that many opportunities available. So I was working in operations where I was at public supermarkets in Florida. And a position became available, and it was my true passion. I wanted to work in that area. And the reason for it is because I knew I had an opportunity to influence people at a small scale as an operator. Mm-hmm. But being in HR, you have an opportunity to impact the entire organization. Mm. And that was the driving force behind me wanting to become an HR professional. There was a lot of activity going on where the function was starting to become far more sophisticated. We were starting to shift from being purely payroll administrators and benefit administrators and I call it administrative, for lack of a better term, function, to now one that was driving a strategic platform. Things like workforce planning, things like succession planning. Those were things that we started to have a conversation with our operators about when I joined the function, and folks would look at us going, "Oh, we can actually start thinking about what we're going to do in a year in terms of people."
And next week, yeah.
And it feels like a long time ago, but it was the early 1990s, and I will say that that's what generated my interest in the function. And I did switch from from HR to operations, and I in the role that I held as the president of Latin America and the Caribbean for Burger King, where I had the opportunity to run restaurants in 28 countries in the Caribbean and Latin America.
That's a lot. That's a lot of restaurants.
It's a lot of countries and a lot of restaurants, but it was really a wonderful opportunity to go back to my operating roots, and then get to exercise what I had learned as an HR professional. And we had a troubled market. We turned it around, and we turned it around because of people ideals. In other words, we were implementing programs that were all people-centric, looking at talent differently, looking at how ideas were generated and how we were going out to market. So I think that even the HR experience proved extremely valuable in my operating role.
Yeah, I mean, my experience. I mean, as you know, I've worked in some pretty big companies as well, and what I found was when you actually have to sit down and draft something as a communication to a large body of people, or a large team, or a significant part of the business, you really have to think it through. You really have to, so getting the communication right, because it's how is it going to land on their lap? How are they going to perceive that communication? And I think it's
absolutely
it's underestimated that you've got to write simply as well. You've got to write clearly and simply and in an understandable way. And it sounds like even the complexity of if you were traversing in your president role when you were at Burger King, with 28 countries, then obviously you've got all the different cultures, all the different languages. So it makes it it's not a 2-minute job, is it? It's something you've got to really think through and plan.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is something that's extremely important that a lot of companies miss. And what I mean by that is one size does not fit all. You can't just create a memo and cascade it out the organization and expect it to be perceived or received similarly across job functions and across geographies. That's not how it works. In some instances, you have different levels of employees that are of different levels of sophistication or education. That message needs to be created for that audience. It's no different than any other communications or marketing initiative. And I think that HR folks sometimes feel very comfortable just writing a program or writing a memo or writing an email and saying, we're going to cascade this and everybody's going to understand it.
Like a boilerplate.
Absolutely. And that's not the case. I mean, we've helped organizations develop creative communication around how folks are getting compensated or equity compensation, for example. In some instances, if you've never worked for a publicly traded company, all of a sudden they're providing you shares and options. This could be, a complete new thing for you. I've created communication that even C-suite executives will come up to me and say, I didn't know that. I didn't know that this is how I'm going to get paid.
Right.
And I know folks that in the people functions are sitting there going, oh gosh, that I've seen myself quite a bit, and I agree. But I think how you communicate to, let's say, a truck driver that is not going to hopefully not pick up their smartphone to read a memo, or somebody who's working in a production facility compared to somebody who's sitting in front of a computer all day. The methods of communication have to be different. A truck driver, they love the idea of a podcast, or they love the idea of a voice message, because it doesn't prevent them from stopping what they're doing safely. And in some instances, others just gravitate directly into video because it's far more engaging, or they they like the idea of certain audiences getting messaging through gamification. There's so many options that impact an organization's culture through their communications, and I can't stress it more that, especially during the pandemic, communication is extremely important, and it has to be almost a belief system that you have to over communicate, and over communicate.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Was I think my experience is that in times where your organisation is fragmented or you've got challenges, then actually over communicating is what you should do. I mean, that's I think that's the best practice, isn't it? Because
absolutely,
because it removes the kind of the FUD factor, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that sometimes
and you have to
plays on people's minds. So.
Absolutely, and folks fill the vacuum. If they don't hear from you, then they'll start to believe that things are going wrong, or maybe there's something wrong with me, or I haven't spoken to my boss in 2 weeks. What's going on? There's a lot of that going on because of this environment, and for companies that have started to project that they're going to have a fairly large workforce, even post-pandemic, that is working from home, they need to figure out a way to measure performance, manage productivity, and engage the population. And this is not a new science. This is just a new calling. I think something that's been done in the past, but it just needs to be done a little bit more effectively
in a smart way. Yeah, look after the humans.
Absolutely,
rather than looking after the machines like people are doing all the time.
And I would agree. And it certainly is going to be here for a long time. It's not going to be a flavor of the month.
So one of the things I think that you've done, which is quite interesting. So I was speaking to a gentleman who's the CEO of a very large company in the US the other week, and he made a transition from. It's going to be an episode that's going to be published soon. He made a transition from being a CFO into being a CEO. And I suppose it sounds like you've done a similar transition from being the CPO or CHRO into being a president and actually having P&L responsibility. How did you find that?
Well, I think that if you are a effective human resources leader, you're going to also keep an open mind as to what functions your people are coming from. Are they coming from just the straight vertical from an HR specialist all the way up to CHRO, or are you going to bring people in from other sides of the business, marketing, finance, information technology, and other areas, which creates a very wholesome and well-rounded HR team. Conversely, that allows you the opportunity to learn from them, which then prepares you if you need to move on to a role to stretch your own abilities, which means you could go into an operating role or another discipline. I think there's a lot of folks out there that believe that anybody can do HR, and frankly, anybody can do marketing. And the answer is no. Not anybody can do human resources. Not anybody can do marketing. The challenge here is that because of that, there's a lot of folks that believe that, well, I can bring anybody from a different function to go run an HR department, but those HR people that are there may not be able to move on to other areas. And we need to be able to figure out, how do we change that? How do we change the perception that human resources leaders don't have the ability to go be a chief information officer or a CFO, or if you have it in your background and you have the discipline and the experience, then certainly you can move on to a different role. You just need to have a culture that allows for that. And not every culture will allow you to step out of your vertical, right? And then I get to see a lot of CFOs and chief marketing officers segue into the chief executive office, but I've only seen a handful of chief people officers that have moved into the CEO position, and they've been very effective CEOs. And I think that in some instances they were purely heads of HR their entire careers, and in some instances they had other disciplines in their background.
So would you say you found your transition reasonably straightforward, or would you say you had some challenges or some transitions, or how do you feel?
Well, I think we all, especially in my case, where I made a conscious decision not to work in one industry. I love the idea of taking my expertise and moving from one industry to another industry to another industry.
Yeah.
And leveraging what I had already learned in my prior life to other organizations. I think, it would be rare for a senior executive to say that, they didn't have great success or they stumbled in a role or an organization because what they brought to the table may not have been something that organization benefited from or had any interest in. And I think that if you've had an opportunity to go from one organization as you have to another organization and leverage learnings and took your experience with you, those organizations certainly benefited from your expertise. Because when you got to sit at the table and folks around you were maybe lifelong employees of the organization.
One role, yeah.
Correct. They would sometimes look at you and say, hey, how do they do it someplace else? And they may not like that answer. That's okay. But at least you have that experience.
You mean the classic NIH, as we used to call it in GE, not invented here.
Not invented here, right? I think that depends on the organization's character and culture.
Yeah, because some organisations. When I was at GE, they used to actively encourage us to benchmark externally when Jack Walsh was running it to kind of see how we were doing.
Absolutely,
and see if we were actually on the right track, or we were like laggards or leaders.
I remember a story where somebody was doing a lot of benchmarking in terms of their top line sales, and they asked the HR function to help determine whether there was a direct correlation between the people that we had in those jobs and the external performance comparators. And what we discovered was that we were celebrating 2 to 3% incremental sales every year, as it was a big deal. But then our competitors were not celebrating 7 or 8 or 9% increases year over year. So even though we were moving up, we weren't moving up as aggressively as our competitors. So benchmarking is far more important today than I think it has been in prior years, where you were just celebrating your performance internally and your people internally without knowing what was out in the market.
Well, there's a yin and a yang to it. So I think some of the guys in Silicon Valley these days say, "Oh, just ignore all, just ignore your competition." Yeah. You read the Peter Thiel book, 1 to 0, yeah, or 0 to 1, should I say? And then you go, unless you've got actually a unique proposition, then actually you don't have any competitors. It's impossible. So just get on with it.
Yeah, it's a little bit bewildering to me that sometimes I'll see organizations that are losing market share, that are declining in top line revenue. They're celebrating their earnings or their EBITDA margins, but yet they're losing market share year after year. They're losing top line revenue. They're losing customers, but yet they're celebrating because they're still bringing in healthy EBITDA margin. But frankly, you can't save yourself to success, and you got to look around and see how others are doing.
You can't cost cut to success, is that what you call it?
Absolutely. And sometimes your traditional competitors are no longer the ones you should be comparing yourself against, which is another factor that I see quite often. Even when we start developing branding campaigns, I'll ask somebody, who's your talent competitor? And they'll give me the 2 or 3 traditional competitors, and I'll spend a couple of days researching. The team will look at who's recruiting those types of roles. And what you recognize is that, no, it's not the one you thought it was. These are the 3 other industries, and these are the 2 large employers in that industry that are recruiting people, sometimes in the same geography. But you were so focused on your direct competitor. And by the way, you both or all 3 or 4 may be declining year after year in your top line or market share, and others are coming around and taking and filling that void.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you look, I mean, even if you look at something like, this other CEO that I had on the show the other week, he used to flip burgers at McDonald's, your competitor, right? He said it was a very interesting experience. It was one of his first jobs, and now he's running a multi-billion-dollar telco. And the but the interesting thing is, if you look at just burgers as an example, right? You could look at Five Guys, yeah. Look at Shake Shack, yeah. Those two, you thought that with Burger King and McDonald's, you can have as many burgers variants as you could think about, and you could eat in the whole world or forever for your lifetime. And yet, people still enter that segment and try and differentiate and try and compete with the big boys or the big girls, you could call it. McDonald's and BK.
Absolutely, and you could, it's pretty interesting in the life cycle of just food chains, for example, how you saw small regional players take over the market in some instances. I mean, in my fast food career, we had let's say the pizza business. You had Pizza Hut, and then you had Domino's, and then you had Papa John's here in the U.S. And these were all small players at one point that became very large players, right? So I think you can't take it for granted that these small organizations can eventually overtake you, and we've seen that over and over and over again. And the people side of it, to me, in watching that, is how you're sometimes rewarding your people in terms of understanding what's going on in the external market or performing internally, and also performing in comparison to the market. I mean, I can tell you one particular story where I saw an employer where the majority of their employees were rated 4 or 5 in a scale of in a 5-point scale, but yet the company went bankrupt. So you're sitting there going, how is it possible that your employees are overperforming on a scale?
They're all stars. Yeah.
They're all stars, but yet the organization goes bankrupt. And the reason for it is because you have such an insular view of what's going on,
right? That
you're so focused on the inside that sometimes you forget to look at what's going on in the market. And if your people strategy is not taking into consideration what's going on in the market, then you're clearly not going out there and recruiting people from the outside that have different knowledge and skills. You're definitely not recruiting people that have different experiences, but instead you're highlighting, promoting people that are within your organization that may be perpetuating the old behaviors that may not suit you. They may have been perfect for the past.
Well, your managers don't know how to manage or lead or performance rate, and so that kind of those kind of things which unless you get put through. What I would observe is there's lots of people who go into those manager roles that have they been through or they have been exposed to that kind of that leadership training that helps them. Yeah,
absolutely.
And it sounds like you've been through some interesting companies. I've been through some interesting companies where they spent a lot of money on doing that, to try and equip people to cope with that and to build the culture in the right way. But then I suppose one of my next questions was about kind of like, if you look at, I remember seeing in the London paper, it's like join Goldman Sachs, yeah, or join Google, yeah. So that's like 12, 15, 18 months ago. And graduates that are coming out now, they're going, okay, where do I go? I traditionally went into banking because that's like that's where the track that people would go down. Now people are saying, no, I'm not really interested in banking. It's now let's go another route. I mean, because the whole job market's changing. Is that what you're seeing with these new generations as well over in the US?
It's been changing for decades. I mean, I remember when the list of the best places
to work
to work for recent college grads were places like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, companies that disappeared, right?
Yeah,
and they weren't always in the top 10. I think it just changes every year. It changes, and here's the beauty of this, and this is why I can't overemphasize the need for senior leaders to understand the view of their organizations externally, how they're perceived as potential employers. Because sometimes the story inside may not match the story outside. So you may hear, well, I want to go work for fill in the blank. when I graduate, whatever company it is. And then you ask that person, well, what do you know about that company? Mm. Well, I read about this, this, and this, or look at their top line revenue, or look at how they're growing. But you don't know their culture. And if there's one thing that I learned myself was, don't pick an organization based on what you sometimes read in the the media or online or even in some of these I'm going to call them job rating sites. Instead, do your due diligence and call people inside that have not been there for an extended period of time, but have only been there for 2 or 3 years. If you can reach out to them nowadays, we can all reach out to folks like that because they're on LinkedIn and hear the truth and hear the way that recent employees feel, not folks that have been there for their entire career. But that tells you a lot about the culture of the organization, because if you've been in an organization for a very long time, you can't compare it to other organizations. If you've only been there for a couple of years and you came from someplace else, or if you've worked in different places, you can compare that organization to others. Yeah. And I encourage even recent college grads. I've done a lot of mentoring and serve on a couple of boards with some of the local universities here in South Florida. You have to do your due diligence. You have to understand a bit about the organization that's doing the recruiting on campus, or that that may be aggressively recruiting, even during bad times. Make a phone call a few folks, go on LinkedIn, hear the stories, understand the culture. If there's one thing that an individual can undervalue is a company's culture to your own, and compare it to your own values.
Yeah,
you might discover that
values and beliefs. Yeah, exactly.
that what they do maybe doesn't match your values, and you won't know that until you're there, and then you sit there and go, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm being asked to do this." This is definitely.
Do you think that because of the thing about I know it's a kind of overused term, it's kind of war for talent, the race for talent, or the kind of how to keep talent, attract talent, retain talent. Is it now changing the dynamic of the when the person joins an organization? So it's not just the organization interviewing the relevance of that person for the job, but also the person doing the DD and the due diligence on, is there a fit for me in that job? Because what I've noticed with certain generations, like millennials and stuff like that, their mindset is not about, like job for life. They don't see themselves being in the same organization for 10, 20, 30 years. It's like the gig economy. They say, I might be here for a certain amount of time, then I'm on to my next gig. Are you seeing that as well, or have you experienced that?
Yes, I mean, I don't remember who it was. Maybe Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn, that they called it tour of duty, right?
Oh, tour of duty. Yeah, exactly.
And I believe that the mentality today is that I'm going to go in and provide you my services, and I'm going to learn from your organization, and you're going to benefit from me. And at some point, it may not necessarily be a place where I'm learning a whole lot more from you, and you may find that I'm going to be redundant, or maybe I'm not as value added anymore. I think that's fair, and it's not. One of the things that I learned around longevity is that after having spent 17 years with one employer, and then looking at my career later on as I'm going to put in a tour in this particular company and see how it goes. And some tours were much longer than others. But the reality is that what I learned from that was loyalty is two ways, right? I mean, if you're learning from that organization, if you're gaining experience that fills your lifelong learning, then you might be there for a very long time. If, on the other hand, you find yourself in a situation where, okay, I don't necessarily like it here, or I'm not learning, or I'm not growing. I think that's always been the case, but it is far more acceptable today to see a CV where somebody has been in a job for 2 or 3 years. In the days that we were growing up, if you had less than 5 years in your CV, it was like, why were you only there for 4 years?
People would frown. Question mark.
It's like, you spent 17 years at a company. That's good. That's good. But you only spent
only 17 years. Exactly. Yeah.
But nowadays, folks are moving from one company to another, leveraging their learnings, leveraging their experience. Both sides are benefiting, and I think that's probably going to continue. And with the gig economy, that's also something that you're starting to see far more folks leveraging their learnings, their skill sets, their experience as going on these platforms like Fiverr and others, where they're selling their knowledge, and they're finding that they could be entrepreneurs even, potentially earning a higher salary by leveraging what they learned in their prior employers.
Or even, I know it's not the same for us, but so I've noticed people not going into a corporate career, as you could call it, a large enterprise, going straight from college, university, doing their master's degree or whatever, PhD or whatever, straight into their own business, and actually then just starting from scratch, being completely entrepreneurial from straight off. So
absolutely.
My two sons are 15 and 17 now, so I'm going to be watching it in the next few years to see what they do. It's like, do they go the traditional route, or do they go the kind of the gig economy?
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be influencing them somehow. I'm not sure, Andrew, right?
I don't want to get them to come and work with you in Miami.
Well, we got nicer skies.
Well, I love Miami. It's a fantastic place. I'm going to go straight to the airport and come over.
There you go. We'll host you here.
So thanks for sharing some stuff about your kind of journey and some of the perspectives on kind of HR and leadership stuff like that. That's very, very useful and very interesting. And I mean, I suppose as part of that, link to that, I suppose, I have this concept called, you've probably seen it. There's actually a book written about it. It's called Peaks and Valleys. So, I mean, what if you're going to share some, with peaks and valleys with the audience today, what kind of stories come to mind?
Well, I would say that certainly we all have had peaks and valleys in our career. Sometimes they're related to who we work for. Sometimes they're related to the organizations we worked for. But I had the great fortune of every time I reached a certain level and I got to a certain point, I always wanted to take on a bigger, more aggressive role, kind of that risk rewards mentality.
Right.
And, I think that it's certainly built into your own psyche. If you are resilient and you feel that, if I get to a certain place and I don't like it, then it's okay. I can just brush it off and move on to something else. I think if you're the type like I am, then you're willing to take higher risk for higher rewards. And I will say that I was in some instances very motivated by the adventure that an organization was going to go into. I've been fortunate enough that I saw a company go private, then public, then private, then public. So I participated in 2 initial public offerings.
I've been in the same company.
In the same company.
Oh wow!
And you benefit from an IPO, obviously financially. I've been in turnarounds where you get to participate in very low valuations of an organization on their equity programs, and then you see the fruits of your labor being delivered through much higher valuations. And when you're on senior leadership roles, that is very financially beneficial. Certainly it takes experience to get there, but what I would say is that for me, and this is not everybody's calling, is sometimes taking a risk paid off, and paid off really well in terms of my career progression. And I don't think a lot of folks are sometimes built to take the risk. They may just want to go join a company and not shake things up and not be seen as a culture shape or culture shifter. I think if you are built a certain way, you sometimes are drawn to being an entrepreneur. Sometimes you're drawn to be you want to be
dropped in with your parachute on to sort things out. Yeah,
and I will say that I still think that that the peaks in someone's career are the ones that help you certainly move up in the organizations that you've been in, and both financially and conversely moving on to a different role. But the valleys are the areas where you learned quite a whole lot more about yourself and your career decisions, and in some instances they built the foundation for the next opportunity.
Yes, I think the thing is, it's sometimes valleys are seen as negative, but actually, then if you reflect on it properly, then you realise it's actually been. I won't say it's been planned, but it's something that you need to go through.
Absolutely. I mean, we it's always great to just have the benefit of your
hindsight.
Absolutely. And growth factors in your organizations and your career certainly benefit you financially and benefit you in other ways, but the learnings really sometimes come from seeing that you maybe took a different avenue. In hindsight, you're sitting there going, okay, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done my due diligence. I should have done something different. I should have explored who I was working for, the individual, their value systems, etc. And then realize that you made a mistake and you won't make it again. Hopefully,
I agree.
Not make it again. But it builds a resilience, yeah.
So in terms of, I mean, I know we're on the G&T sessions. So obviously we're not drinking gin and tonic, but obviously maybe in the future we're sat on the Miami South Beach together.
Sounds good.
I'll bring the gin. You can bring the wine. I'll bring the ice. So I mean, in terms of we talked about growth, we talked about tech. I mean, what's your perspectives on tech these days, and what's been your exposure to that as you've gone through your kind of functional and then kind of CEO or president kind of roles? Has it been
absolutely
an interesting journey from that tech side as well? Have you learned a lot? Are you excited about what's going on?
I'll tell you, especially or specifically around the human capital management technology that's out there, we're starting to see some incredibly innovative platforms that are changing the way that people functions operate. And we've seen that progression over the past 5 to 7 years, and maybe even 10 years, where we started out with a basic human capital management system or human resources information system, and now you're starting to see how technology is allowing the people function to become far more effective and efficient. And efficient is really one of the key elements here, because I've looked at, in some instances, organizations and said, this team is too large. How do I reduce the number of people that are doing this type of work, because it's all manual? And you can think, well, I just have to hire people that do more. No, it's really looking at back office. HR is changing dramatically with some technology, especially with AI. The way we have been sourcing, screening, and selecting talent in the past 10 years has evolved. I remember the days when we were putting newspaper ads, right? I mean, nowadays,
typesetting.
It's not horrible, But nowadays you have tools that are helping you select talent so that you're not getting, if you do get tens of thousands of applicants for a particular job, which is not unreasonable anymore in the world of online postings, that you have a system that can help you weed up or weed out, whatever the terminology you may use, the right talent to go and actually meet with or interview or hire. We're starting to see a lot of technology around benefits and compensation optimization. When you think about how we were doing a lot of that work, it was all manual. Nowadays, you have technology. You can easily look at your talent and decide that they're going to focus heavily on strategic elements and on relationship building with other members of the organization rather than focusing on filling papers. We saw the emergence of self-service where managers were going into a platform and just submitting a form, and they just went through an approval process. Before, I would get tons of paperwork, and they had to sign it. I remember those forms in triplicates, right? And I mean, the hiring process, it wasn't that long ago. We were all filling, paper applications and doing everything on
holiday requests. Yeah.
So that world has certainly evolved very quickly. I would venture to guess that it's only going to get more aggressive in the next 3 to 5 years in terms of how human resources technology is impacting the work that we do. AI will continue to evolve. It certainly will not substitute some of the work that human capital professionals are doing because there's certain intuitive skills that are required. But when it comes to back office HR, when it comes to administrative HR, all the things that marked who we were in the foundation of the function, I think are changing and is evolving. And hopefully there'll be a point where we do very little administrative human resources work, and we're focusing on the more important elements, the succession planning, the talent development, the learning and development, the hiring, the screening, the selection of talent that is still so critical for organizations.
Which is a kind of the thinking and doing, as I would call it. It's a lot more about the thinking and planning and analytical skills rather than actually having to get bogged down in all the kind of administrative overhead stuff, which at scale, when you've got thousands of employees,
Yes. And it's fine. And there's, and here's the key component. There's a financial benefit to an organization. As much as we hate to admit it, sometimes having the administrative functions offshore was the first option, right? We were all offshoring a lot of the administrative functions to environments that were cheaper. Offshoring doesn't necessarily make it more efficient. It makes it cheaper in some instances, but it certainly does not make it more effective or for that matter.
I mean, like
efficient.
all the kind of business process offshoring to the Far East and stuff like that. Yeah.
Correct. Or anywhere. It can certainly be even within your own home country environment, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was better or that it was being run more effectively or efficiently. It was just cheaper. And I think that leveraging technology in the long term will make it cheaper, and is going to be far more effective. And there's going to be measurable accuracy to the administrative work. And there's nothing worse than having somebody start and not get paid because of a paper mistake, right? All of a sudden, you got a brand new employee, and a week later, their paycheck hasn't been prepared, and you're sitting there going, "What happened?" Well, we forgot to fill out this form and that form and this form, and the person didn't get paid. Tell them to just wait until next week.
In this new world, you can blame the machine. It was the robot. It was the bot that didn't collect the data from that form that you're supposed to do electronically on LinkedIn or whatever.
Exactly. Insane.
So in terms of what you're doing today, then what are you excited about today? What gets you really excited?
I think that by far the human resources function now has the ability to pick a path. It is the time to decide which path we want to take. There's still that path where we are facilitating administrative functions, where the boss calls us up and says, "Hey, we got a high turnover in this area. Can you figure it out?" And if you take the time and paint a picture, you can actually impact how turnover you can actually impact the turnover in that organization. Or conversely, the boss could be saying, "Hey, we're just losing a bunch of talent here. Can you just go and hire more people, bring me better people?" You got to paint the picture. You got to understand what's causing it. Just like that, there's far more sophisticated stories out there in terms of what HR can deliver. What gets me up in the mornings and what gets me excited is that we are now, especially because of the pandemic, in a situation where you're starting to see a lot of HR functions rise to the occasion and do some amazing things and do things differently and prepare an organization for either a new environment, a new work platform, a new way of doing things. Unfortunately, we are seeing a minority where they are failing. The HR functions are allowing the organization to flounder, and in some instances, you have other functions that are picking up the ball and saying, "Let me take care of that. Let me take care of this." I mean, it's insane when you hear that certain functions are taking over the communications for employees. How is it possible that somebody who is in outside of the people function responsible for communicating to their employees soup to nuts from the time they're hired all the way through the time they're retired? But it's not that unusual. It really isn't, and that to me is still something that I see and try to coach my counterparts or former colleagues in the corporate world, that they need to rise to the occasion at this point.
Well, I mean, people are, still, we're not all being taken over by robots or machines yet, thank God. So
we won't be either, but it's always, they're making burgers now with robots, but I don't think they're as good as some places.
Yes. The Boston Dynamic dogs are flipping burgers nowadays, right? And chasing Jeff Bezos around the park. So I mean, I suppose. So one of the other questions that I suppose about was, what are you most grateful for, given the journey you've been through so far? What are you most grateful for?
Yeah, I would say that it comes back to family. My wife supported me and continues to support me as I do her in her career, in terms of where we went, and sometimes having to move to very cold environments. I'm most grateful for that, for the fact that I had a partner that was willing to take those risks, because you could easily have somebody whisper in your ear, "Are you sure you want to do that? Gosh, that's such a big risk. You have such a great opportunity. You have such a great job. Are you sure you want to be an entrepreneur?" No, that wasn't the case. And she pushed me in my career to say, "Yeah, go for it. Why not?" And I think, we take it for granted that the people around us, family, friends, loved ones, can impact our career path. And you mentioned your two sons. You will have an opportunity to impact their career path, and just like I will have an opportunity to impact my daughter's. She's 15 as well, okay. and have an opportunity to impact her career. And I could easily teach her to set boundaries around her potential, or I could help her decide where she wants to go and leverage her internal wiring to make that decision, right? So I think as I look back and again, 35 plus years of in my corporate world, and then 2 as an entrepreneur, that those 35 years, my dad was a serial entrepreneur, and he only knew how to work for himself.
Right.
And I always wondered how it would be. And I would say that, having folks around you that are sitting there going, why haven't you done this earlier? You want to.
I was going to say, do you wish you'd done it earlier now that you're doing it now? I don't know.
I think that there's a balance. I think if I would have done it earlier, I wouldn't have gained the experience that I have today.
Yeah,
the
kind of the third eye and the insight you've got. Yeah,
correct. But I don't. I think I left the corporate world at the right time and have the right experience, and now be able to help others that were in my seat. And I have to be very grateful to my family and friends that were always, acknowledging that I liked risk and I liked to take on a challenge. And if it was broken, that was for me. If it was working properly,
ring Jose. There's a job here.
And you know what? You do build a reputation that you may be the turnaround person, or that you may be the transformation HR leader. And there's companies that want those turnaround people. When they get there, they're like, "Oh gosh, no, wait, no, that's too much change for us," and that's okay. Sometimes you have to dial it back, or sometimes you just have to choose a different path.
My only guidance about getting with your daughter, you see, who's obviously a teenager like my son's, then is the credibility I got with actually telling them that I've actually got a YouTube channel with more than one video on, and obviously with over 40 videos now. They go, "Are you telling me the truth, Dad?" I said, "Yeah," and they look and they go, "Oh my God, it's true." So there you go. You see, that's the challenge for today is. The Jose Tomas, kind of
that's funny.
The future.
Well, it's funny. I will tell you how my 15-year-old daughter was impressed in a similar story. I posted something on Instagram and I had over 50,000 views.
Oh, fantastic.
And she was like, 50,000 views? How many followers do you have? And I go, well, I only have 10,000 connections. But how did you get 50,000 views? And I go, well, they share it.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And she was impressed by that. I guess if I would have had 50,000 views on an Instagram post, it would have been worth a whole lot more than on LinkedIn.
Or even TikTok. I mean, one of my other guests, he said that his daughter had got a million views on one of her dances.
Oh my God!
In Australia. So there you go. That's the next level for us all. You see, forget YouTube. The next one's TikTok.
That's the next one. Yeah.
So in terms of, just to try and, pull this episode together, I suppose one of the things I was going to ask you was, you've obviously had an amazing journey already. And I suppose for people that listen to this episode of, kind of pearls of wisdom from Jose, what would you share in those kind of areas? What would be the kind of few pearls of wisdom that you think people should think about as they embark on their journey?
Oh, that's kind of tough because, frankly, it's not, what formed me, what shaped me may not necessarily be what helps others. But I think if I were to maybe put one or two nuggets, one is, trust yourself. Sometimes you get feedback from others that may not necessarily be the right feedback for you. It may have worked for somebody else. Maybe you had a boss that gave you feedback, and you have to sometimes sit there and wonder, was that good feedback for me? Maybe my boss gave that feedback to 10 other people that are very different than me. And what worked for them may not work for me. So who you take advice from is extremely important. And, they need to know you. It can't be somebody who you've worked with for a couple of months. I do believe in the coaching model, but I think ultimately the person needs to know who you are in order for them to give you actual feedback about how you should be. I'm going to say more on the behavioral side or on your competency development. Definitely not. We're not talking about a performance management discussion. I'm talking about feedback relative to your competencies, your behaviors, who you are as an individual. I've had feedback that maybe I shouldn't use my hands so much. I mean, really?
Unless you're doing the TikTok video.
That's who I am. I mean, I'm just in some instances animated. So, I think that, frankly, that's one. I think the second piece is you have to make a decision on your own risk tolerance. Mm-hmm. Don't take it from somebody like me that loved risk and loves risk. And I've invested in risky technology platforms, for example. Some have worked out and some haven't. That's not for everybody. Mm. I think just like you have your own investment strategy with your 401k or your pension plan, you have to do the same thing with your own career. And you have to decide how much of you personally is very conservative, how much of you is very aggressive. Mm. And you have to decide in your own psyche, how much risk are you willing to do? Because we do change. I mean, I know that I was far riskier when I reached the middle of my career than I was at the beginning of my career.
Right.
And that paid off for me. Mm. It may not pay off for somebody else, but I think those two things is be careful who you take advice from, because it may not be the best advice for you. And then determine your own risk tolerance and decide on your career whether or not you're willing to take chances or whether you rather have a safer path. Mm. Today's day and age is you can allow others to make the career decisions for you. You could be working in a company for 20 years and never had any inclination of leaving, but then all of a sudden a pandemic hits and the industry's gone. Mm. And you don't have a job. And you can say, well, that's just what happens with a pandemic, or you could have prepared yourself.
You could have planned for that, yeah,
to go into a different industry, but you can never predict it.
Or you build up a side gig of all these different things you could do, which has got your plan B, I suppose. But then I suppose some people say you're not supposed to have a plan B, so you're all to your plan A. So don't watch too many videos and don't read too many books. Yeah, maybe not. Thank you for the time today. It's been a great episode, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well. And
I did. Thank you so much for having me.
This was the first episode actually from Miami.
There you go.
There you go. So soon to be repeated in the future in 2021. We'll have to get you back and see what's going on with BrandSparc.
Awesome.
But that was Jose Tomas, from the CEO and founder of BrandSparc, and thank you very much for your time, and have a wonderful day in Miami, you lucky man.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Have a wonderful week as well. Thank you.